All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third quarterly public update for the Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Management Study. My name is Ann Hugh-Ellis. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the study, and I also have several of my colleagues on today from all across the Mississippi Valley and in our partnering divisions. First, I'd like to check that we have Cherie Price. Cherie, are you online?
Yes, I am, Ann. I'm here.
Great. And Colonel Jones, I think I saw you on the net. How do you read us, Colonel?
Read you loud and clear. How me over?
Hey, Colonel, you're coming in a little broken, but I see you in the vehicle. Great to see you, sir. All right. So again, appreciate everybody joining us today for this update. We're excited to really have this opportunity to keep you all along this journey for this historic study. Our intent is to hold these meetings every 3 to 4 months, just so we can continue to give you those regular updates and really provide a platform for folks to ask questions, leave comments, and to really just have some dialogue right on the study. At the very end of the meeting, if you've joined us before, you've seen this in the past, but we do a little Q&A or a survey at the very end where we ask for your feedback on how useful and effective this webinar series is. So for those that stick around all the way to the end to the Q&A, please do take a minute to fill out that survey. We have a QR code and a web link. We do use that information, and it really helps us refine and make sure that the time for these meetings is useful and helpful for you all. Just in case this is the first time that you've joined us, or maybe you just need a little refresher on WebEx. I know everybody uses different platforms. Just to kind of quickly run through how you can leave comments today. So first of all, you can hit the little chat button. The little window will pop up. It might look slightly different on your screen if you're joining by web in a browser. But anyway, you click the little chat, then you can type in your comment. Note that it goes to everybody in the webinar unless you change that dropdown. And so that's one way that you can ask a question or leave a comment. Another way is to unmute yourself, which again, I'm kind of zoomed in here. There's a button to unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand. So if we have a lot of people trying to talk at once, we would ask that you use that raise your hand feature. And my colleague, Matt Rowe, is going to help moderate the Q&A session. And so he'll call on people as he sees the hands raised. If you're joining by phone only and aren't on the webinar and you can't see these symbols that I'm describing, we will have a point in the meeting where we will go to those on the phone. And at that point, you can unmute. The way to unmute by phone is *6. So we'll recap that again when it comes time for Q&A and explain how those on the phone can unmute. And maybe my last tip is if you're on the phone and webinar, you might be double muted. So when the time comes, if you're on both, you do have to unmute both places. And then finally, you can always email us during the meeting, after the meeting, in between meetings. We check our email every day. So send us a note just to help us keep track of information. Appreciate it if in the subject line you noted that your comments related to the quarterly public update. But again, email lmrcomp@usace.army.mil. And so maybe just to test that everybody can use the chat function today for those that are on the WebEx. We'd like you to answer this question in the chat. And actually, this was a comment that came up on our previous meeting. We're hearing that folks are learning about these meetings through different avenues. And so to help us get the word out, we'd like to hear about where you heard about this meeting. So did you receive an email from our LMRComp email address? Did you see one of our press releases or maybe our social media post from last week? Or did a non-Army Corps personnel let you know about this meeting? Or is there some other mechanism? So if you could please go in the chat, type out your answer, put the number. We would really appreciate it. And if you did not get it from us directly and you would prefer to get our message from us directly, please send us an email. We may just not have your contact information. This is a big study area. I know we don't have everybody, and I really appreciate you forward this notice because that helps us get the message out. But if you want messages directly from us, don't hesitate to reach out. Just send us an email with your contact information, and we're happy to get you added to our stakeholder database. And looks like we got a lot of folks chatting, so that's great. I'm glad we've all figured out how to use the chat. Looks like it's a good mix of email and then folks hearing about it externally. So that's great. All right. Then I think we're ready to dive into the meeting. So we'll do a quick recap of the purpose of this study and where we are in the process. Cherie is going to provide us all an update on the screening process for our measures, where we are in our hydrodynamic and sediment modeling. We'll share some of the stakeholder engagement that we've been doing and what we're hearing from our stakeholders. And we also went back to our last quarterly public update and looked at some of the questions you all asked us that we were not able to answer during that update. So we've pulled those over and have answers for today. And then we'll highlight some of the next steps and then open it up for questions and comments. And I would ask if folks can mute themselves. I think we can mute on our end, but just because there's a lot of people, help us out by making sure that you stay muted until the Q&A portion. Okay, so a quick recap for the study about what this study is, if this is your first meeting. So why are we studying the river? So Congress authorized the Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Management Study in Section 213 of the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. And it was also amended in 2022 to be a 100% federally funded study. And in the study authority, the Corps is directed to undertake a comprehensive study of the Lower Mississippi River from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, and to identify recommendations for actions under either our existing authorities or after congressional authority for the management of the basin for multiple purposes that you see here on the screen. So everything from hurricane and storm damage risk reduction and flood risk management through navigation to ecosystem environmental restoration, water supply, hydropower production, recreation, and any other purposes determined by the Secretary. So it certainly is comprehensive, not only in its geographic scope, but in the missions that we are directed to look at. And that's really what makes this study unique from other studies that the Corps has undertaken, is the fact that we are looking at multiple mission areas. I know in previous meetings, some of you have asked, how does this study differ from other efforts underway? And I appreciate that every time we do these updates, you all share with us other efforts that are going on, whether it's the Lower Mississippi River Resource Assessment efforts, if it's the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan, the Upper Mississippi Restoration efforts, right? There's a lot happening in the river, and so continue to share those with us. We are certainly doing our best to coordinate and keep awareness of all of that. But we always do appreciate when you all bring those synergistic efforts to the table in these forums. So how are we conducting the study? So we're using our risk-informed decision-making process that we call planning that we use for all of our civil works feasibility studies. We're also required to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And so both of these processes, our feasibility study process and our NEPA process, they're integrated. So we streamline our decision-making and avoid duplication of efforts. We've talked about some of these milestones in previous meetings, so just to kind of give a recap of where we are in these processes, on the feasibility study side, we are working towards our tentatively selected plan. And as a part of that, we're beginning to draft the NEPA documentation. If you were not able to join our last quarterly update in October of 2024, just a quick recap on the left side of your screen. We talked about some of the engagement that we have been doing with our federal and state partners, as well as the consultation with tribal nations and direct stakeholder engagement as you all reach out to us directly to participate in your meetings. We were reviewing the input we received during public scoping and beginning to screen measures that you use to develop alternatives. We had completed modeling and developing the models for the hydrodynamic and hydrologic models of the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers, and we were beginning to investigate how we might change the way we operate our existing structure, such as the old river control structure, using those modeling tools. And we were in the process of calibrating and validating our models. And so since that last quarterly public update, so over the last 3 to 4 months, certainly have continued our stakeholder engagement. We've screened additional measures, and Cherie will have an update for you on kind of where we are in the measure screening process. And we've completed developing our sediment models and are now integrating the sediment and the H&H modeling together so that we can be looking at both water and sediment in the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers to evaluate future conditions under different operational scenarios. And we'll get into that a little bit more in today's briefing. So with this, I'm going to pass it to Cherie. And Cherie, you just let me know when you need me to flip slides.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I was just in the process of responding to Mr. Reeder in the chat. Yes, we will be able to use comprehensive benefits, and we will monitor, the policy related to that if anything changes or evolves as we move through the study. But yes, the plan now is to, as we would on other studies, for our measures to evaluate comprehensive benefits. Okay, so this triangle here has been presented previously in the study, and this really represents our plan formulation process to get to a tentatively selected plan. And so just as a reminder here, the base of the triangle starts with a water and sediment budget, which is really foundational to the study. And this is where we're looking at our operational changes at the Old River control structure, as well as some of the other MR&T flood risk management structures. And we move through the triangle here to the middle to our regional features. This is where a lot of our other measures outside of operational scenarios are throughout all of our different regions. If you recall, and if you recall, the study area extends from Cape Girardeau to the Gulf of Mexico. So the measures do vary throughout the study area. And the plan here is to get to a final array of alternatives coming up within about the next 4 months or so in the May timeframe, and then to a TSP. And our TSP milestone meeting is currently scheduled for February of 2026. And if you recall, we do have the opportunity here in our authority for LMRCMS to identify tier studies and programs that may or may not fit within the $25 million 5-year time frame for this study. And so we are identifying those as we move throughout. Next slide. So this illustration really demonstrates the screening process of our measures. And if you recall where we started here, we conducted multiple charrettes and tribal meetings, public scoping meetings, and interagency coordination, as well as using previous studies. As Ann said, there's a lot of ongoing studies on the Mississippi River, not only outside of our agency, but within our agency as well. And so we use those foundational studies that have been previously completed, along with other authorizations and expert experience and knowledge to help guide the measures process. And we started with over 500 measures in the study and have been working through that list methodically. And the unique thing about the LMRCMS study is that because the authority includes language to identify tiered studies, we have the opportunity to not lose things completely, right? So if something is screened, then we have the opportunity to move it over tiered study effort if it may not fit that well under the actionable process that are executing. So we did have a large number of duplicate measures and also things that they don't fit within the core policy as far as what defines a measure. And so a lot of like 66% of what was screened was actually duplicate information. So even though it sounds like a lot over 500, there were a lot of repeats within the measures list that we received, which is a good thing, right? I think that demonstrates that there's a lot of similar thinking and understanding of what the needs are on the Mississippi River. Next slide. I don't know if we have a glitch in, but it's not advancing the slides at the moment. Okay, there we go. Okay, so some of the criteria, we're not limited to these criteria, but we wanted to provide some examples of the criteria that has been used to walk through the screening of the measures. Some examples are, will the measure really effectively achieve the study objectives? Anytime the Corps engages in a study, we have a 6-step planning process where we want to make sure we're adequately identifying the problem that is being solved, that we're trying to solve, and the objective to achieve that. And so this was a big part of the screening of the measures. And we, as Ann mentioned, we have multiple different mission areas under the study. And so going through each of those mission areas, and there are some measures that have multiple missions that we are accomplishing or, resolving through that particular measure. Is the measure within the study, the authority of the study? We do have a pretty broad authority, but there were some instances where a measure wouldn't fit within what we have the authorization to do or within the study area. Acceptability is always an important criteria when we're screening measures. Is it acceptable to state and local entities and the public, and is it compatible with existing laws, regulations, and public policies? We always have to consider impacts when we're evaluating measures. So if we are trying to improve a situation in one location, we may be increasing impact somewhere else. So there are trade-offs that need to be conducted when we're going through our measures analysis. Was the measure duplicative? I mentioned that one previously. Are there other authorities or projects or programs or studies that have already been addressing the issue that's been identified? We found that a lot as well, that there were already other authorities or programs that were already executing the implementation of some of the measures that had been identified. And lastly, we have here, is it cost effective? That's always a consideration. To see that we're getting good outputs for the amount of investment in a particular solution. Can everyone still hear me okay? I just want to do a mic check. I'm getting a lot of static on my end.
Hey, Sheree, yeah, I can still hear you fine.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. So next consideration for our screening is there are constraints. There are things that we just cannot do when we are looking at implementation of something in particular. Threatened and endangered species and their habitats are always something that can constrain our plan formulation. In this situation, because we have the Mississippi River and Tributaries Program, we have to ensure that there's no loss of authorized navigation performance or flood risk management performance. We always need to ensure that we're not improving in an area that would allow for inducing development. So it may be an area that floods currently, but we remove flooding from that area. And then developers may want to come in and start, constructing in that area. We want to avoid that. We always try to do that as part of our studies. Avoid or minimize impacts to water supply. That includes municipal, industrial, residential, tribal, and freshwater infrastructure. And lastly, we have tribal impacts in ensuring that we're inclusive of effects to tribal lands or restricted access to resources. Next slide. Sorry, Ann, I'm getting a delay on my end. I'm not sure if everyone is or if it's just me, but it's taking a minute for the next slide to pull up.
I think it's on your side, Sheree, but it's
okay.
It's coming.
Okay.
If you're not seeing it yet, it's the hydraulic instead of modeling.
Yep, I see it now. Thank you. So just to kind of go through this quickly, because we've gone through this in previous briefings, but we do have 4 different models under the study currently, 2 hydraulic models, one is on the Mississippi River and one is on the Atchafalaya. And the Mississippi River system-wide model is a 1D HEC-RAS model, and the Atchafalaya model is 1D HEC-RAS and has also some 2D capability. The sediment modeling on the Atchafalaya side is a HEC 6T model, and the Mississippi River sediment modeling is a 1D model. And we did not start from scratch with the modeling on this study. We have been using models that were developed previously for other efforts on the Mississippi River, and also using expertise outside of the Corps. So we also have models that have been developed by our Engineering Research and Development Center, along with some of our partners and stakeholders like the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. There are other Mississippi River models and efforts going on within those agencies as well, where models have been developed. And so we're capitalizing on all of that information. And these models are being used to evaluate operational scenarios at Old River control and other flood control structures, as well as our other measures within the study. Next slide. Okay, so the next slide is, I'm not seeing it yet, but it's ecosystem modeling. And so we have not yet identified ecosystem modeling. On the study, we will use our final array of alternatives to identify those models. Our ecosystem models do have to go through a certification process. And we do, though, have extensive.
Hey, Cherie, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're coming in really staticky. I don't know if you want to try to disconnect and then reconnect. The internet.
Okay, let me, I'm going to connect to the Ethernet and see if that helps. I was on Wi-Fi. Is it?
Cherie, if you can hear me, you might try turning off your video for a bit. Maybe your Wi-Fi bandwidth is struggling.
Well, while we wait for Cherie to come back, I'll go ahead and work and finish this slide. And so what Cherie was speaking to, right? The team, a part of this study will be looking at the ecosystem impacts, right? But that is going to be tailored to those measures and those final alternatives that we develop. So there is a list of potential modeling tools that we have available to use, and so that's what the team has identified initially. So although it says here that we have not yet been identified, we have some ideas, but until we finalize our final array of alternatives, that is what we'll then use to determine which ecosystem models do we need to evaluate those alternatives and look at the benefits and impacts to the system. Let me do a quick check to see if she came back. Are you back? If not, I'll keep rolling. Okay, I think Cherie lost internet, so I'm going to keep rolling, and then if she comes back, she is welcome to chime in. So one of the things that Cherie was just speaking to, you heard her talk about how we're using our modeling tools, our H&H and sediment modeling tools, to evaluate how we operate the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, and in particular, features like the Old River Control Structure. And so one of the things we're trying to look at is how can we find flexibility in how we operate that system. I know many of you have some familiarity already about the Old River Control Structure and that mandated 70-30 split, which how the structure operates now. And so under this study, the LMRCMS study, we're looking to find flexibility and not just have a static 70-30 split year round. So one of the ways the team is looking at that is we're looking at all the different mission areas and when are the different times of the year does it make sense to maybe explore that flexibility in the system. So for example, right at the very top, we're talking about looking for flood risk management opportunities during high flows. And so what the team is looking at is when the river is rising, can we operate the Old River Control to put more water down the Atchafalaya? So instead of a 70-30 split, to do a 60-40 split. Again, putting more water down the Atchafalaya when the river is rising. Now we have to evaluate what those impacts might be, right? So at this point, these are kind of the conceptual ideas that the team is going to analyze. On the flip side is then when the Mississippi River is falling, can we operate the old river control structure to put less water down the Atchafalaya, let it start draining out, and again, kind of push that water back into the Mississippi River. So that would flip us back to an 80-20 split. With any of these changes in the old river control structure, we have to look at whether there's structural limitations. And so on the engineering side, that's a big piece to whether we have any flexibility. And so looking at those structural limitations will be important part of this study. And then it's not just about the old river, but it's about flow triggers at other structures, such as Morganza and Bonnie Carey. How can we alter those different triggers, those different rule sets that are currently in place, again, to move water and sediment differently? So that's just really looking at it first from the flood risk management perspective, but there's also, we want to look at it from the navigation and from the ecosystem restoration perspective. So for navigation, right, navigation becomes really critical during low flows in particular, right? That's when we have those low flows, we need some more flexibility on where to move water. So when we're trying to move navigation down the river, we can get water to where it needs to go. So or is there a way to put more water in the Mississippi River Channel during the low flows? But then at the flip side, right, we need to evaluate what navigation impacts might exist on the Atchafalaya side. And then again, need to keep in mind, what are the limitations at the structure itself? And then finally, between these bounds of 60-40 to 80-20, when we're not flood fighting, right, when we're not in extreme low, we're kind of in this either the rising or the falling limb, is there some opportunities there for ecosystem operations where we can benefit those critical habitats and species in the Atchafalaya Basin and along the Mississippi River? So can we find those benefits in between those flow splits? And again, also looking at the triggers at Morganza and the Bonnie Carey. And so what the figure on the right is doing, and I know it's a bit small here, but it's kind of conceptualizing what these bullets is telling us. And so what this line is it's a kind of a kind of hypothetical hydrograph of the Mississippi River. So it's looking at the flows in the river and where those opportunities to focus on a particular mission area. So when the river is rising, right, there's maybe an opportunity there to look at the ecosystem restoration opportunities. But then as we approach the project design flood or the PDF, we really have to prioritize flood risk management. And that's where, ensuring that we provide those flood risk reduction benefits becomes critical. And then as the river starts to fall again, we might have some flexibility there to look for ways to operate Old River to achieve eco benefits. But then on the flip side, right, when we get into the extreme low water conditions, we have to prioritize navigation, or we have to look to see if there's a way to prioritize navigation by operating the river in the old river control structure in such a way. So I know that's a lot, right? There's a lot kind of embedded, and it's when you start thinking about, moving water and moving sediment differently in the system, I think we can all appreciate that there's going to be, different benefits and different impacts. And so this study will have to analyze what those are. I saw Cherie, I think, pop up momentarily. Let me give her an opportunity to see if she's back. Okay, I take that as a no. That's all right. We're going to keep rolling. Let me go to the next. Great. So in addition to looking at the changes and how we operate the system, that's, we're looking at that at a system-wide level, but we're also still going to look at kind of regional and local measures, local opportunities to solve issues up and down the study area. We shared some of these on our last quarterly public update. And so this is kind of recapping some of those, and we've also kind of further refined this list. So some of the measures that are still on the table for reducing flood risk are looking at ways to reduce roughness in the Batcher. Again, how can we optimize our existing floodways, such as using Old River Control Complex and Morganza before having to open the Bonnie Carey spillway? So that's kind of related to those operational scenarios I talked about in the previous slide. Is there a way to look to operate old river control structure, right, to flush above authorized levels so we can get more sediment through the Mississippi River? And then certainly kind of looking for opportunities or areas where we may need to raise the Mississippi River and tributaries project levees. Looking at some of the measures retained for improving navigation, we've heard a lot in our in the public scoping about providing a 12-foot navigation channel from Baton Rouge to Cairo. So that's something the team is starting to investigate now to see where those low spots, those trouble areas are, and how frequently the low spots occur throughout the year and under what conditions. Restricting flow downstream of the East Bank crevasses to regulate flow. Again, going back to modifying Old River Control Complex to move sediment. Another measure proposed was to close distributaries on the Atchafalaya River to increase stream power. Moving on to measures related to ecosystem restoration. And again, many of these actually cross mission areas. So you're seeing some of that repetition because they hit multiple mission areas. Many of these came also from the Lower Mississippi River Resource Assessment effort. So returning flow to abandoned oxbow lakes and meanders, establishing system-wide riparian buffers, restoring connectivity to secondary channels, creating or restoring native river cane, break habitat, dedicated dredging for wetland enhancement, and dredging sand and placing in crevasses for land building and to mitigate saltwater intrusion. Working our way now to some of the measures related to water supply. So continue dredging in Atchafalaya and select areas for drinking water reliability, diverting access Mississippi River surface water to tributaries for ecosystem restoration and to reduce agricultural demand on the aquifers. Pumping water into oxbows such as Moon Lake to allow controlled releases to tributaries. And then finally, measures related to recreation, emergency response. So partnering with organizations to implement walking and biking paths, reconnecting secondary channels for recreational use and access, and installing boat ramps on public access points for recreation, emergency access, and data collection. Right. When Cherie was talking on the previous slide, she kind of showed that triangle of how we're approaching this study at a system-wide level, at a regional level, again, working all towards developing that tentatively selected plan. And a part of that, we had those purple arrows going off to the side about tiered studies. So these tiered studies are the kind of additional elements that we heard about in scoping that we cannot complete under the comprehensive study. And so these tiered studies could fall in one of these categories, right? They could fall under the authority of the Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Management Study, but again, be subject to our budget and time that was specified in our authority. They might fall under another existing authority that the Corps already has. And in that case, whatever cost share requirement that study or that authority has would then apply. And then finally, some tiered studies might require new authorization from Congress. So Congress would have to authorize it, and it would be considered a new start study. And all of these would require their own kind of investment decision made. And so as we begin to identify those tiered studies, our intent is to summarize them using what we call the Section 7001 criteria. Some of you might be familiar with that. And we would also potentially include them in our annual report to Congress, if not sooner. I think there's areas where we're going to identify things that can be rolled off sooner, and we may not necessarily have to wait till the annual report process, but that is an avenue that we can communicate to Congress as these tiered studies come to light. All right, almost done, a few more slides, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Just wanted to highlight here our broader engagement strategy, and this quarterly public update is just one piece of that. So we regularly engage with our federal and state partners throughout the year, and we've been doing that from the beginning. And so what this graphic is really just showing is the number, the quantity, and the diversity of engagements that we do to try to ensure that we are collaborating and hearing from our partners. We also do regular tribal consultation right now that's on a quarterly basis. These public meetings are on a quarterly basis. And then we also do stakeholder engagement. So as individual partners reach out to us asking for an update, we're happy to do those as often as folks reach out to us. So I've gotten the question before, what are you hearing? What are you hearing in these other avenues, right? Recognizing that some of those engagements don't involve everybody. So I just wanted to share some of the feedback that we've heard in these other avenues. So we've heard a general support of our scoping report that we've released over the summer. We talked about that on our last quarterly update. We hear a lot about ensuring that we're synergistic with other programs and efforts that are going on right now. Whether it's the Deepwater Horizon Restoration Program happening in the Gulf, Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan, and there's others. And so because it's a large study area, we really do look to our partners to help us ensure that we have that visibility, awareness of other efforts going on, that we have the potential to influence, or that they might influence what we do in this study. Folks continue to ask us to, expand and continue our stakeholder engagement. Every so often there's a new group that we hadn't thought of that someone will bring to the table and ask that we coordinate with. When it comes to the specific requirements and recommendations that come out of the study, our federal and state agency partners in particular have asked that we make sure that we, consider their review requirements. What are they required and their responsibility to review, but also any impacts to their own missions and their own ability to implement. So that federal, state, tribal coordination is really critical when we, as we start to develop the more specific recommendations. And then this last one, I think I've heard this from maybe just about every kind of engagement we've done is, and this is a challenge, but tailoring the information. And sometimes these avenues are difficult to cover the whole geographic scope. So that is something we're continuing to work on, is how can we tailor the information to the region that you're interested in so that you understand what those impacts might be, what those benefits are. And that's something as we develop that final array and we start analyzing those impacts, may require us to kind of rework how we do these quarterly public updates and to make sure that you all are hearing the information in your region that you're interested in. And then just some of the questions from our October public update that you all asked that we did not answer on the call. And I see some of the folks on today, so I'm glad to see you on. Hopefully you recognize your question here. So when there was a question about differentiating suspended sediment and bedload sediment, I did want to acknowledge in the sediment modeling that we're doing, it's going to include all sediment. So it's going to include both bed and suspended. To inform the bed elevation 50 years out and 100 years out. We're also doing a geomorphic assessment based on data, and it does include suspended load, and then we can kind of back our way into the bed load. If there's still a question on that, I think that came from Sean Duffy. If there's still a question on that, we have some of our subject matter experts on the phone and we can dive into that a little bit more. There was a request for a stakeholder meeting in Mississippi Sound, and I just wanted to thank Mayor Rafferty. I see you online today for hosting the New Orleans District and the Mobile District last week. We met with some of the mayors as well as the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources and the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality and some local business owners last week and to listen to their concerns in Mississippi Sound. And there were some ideas thrown around about a potential tiered studies. So appreciate the collaboration there and look forward to working with the Department of Marine Resources and others to maybe flesh out more what that tiered study might look like. There was a meeting participant.
You and your team.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
great.
You have
Thanks,
a great
Mayor.
team. Thank you.
Wonderful. We had someone who needed to be connected to the St. Louis District. We were happy to help make that connection. There was a request for us to participate in the planning of a coastal resiliency lab, and again, glad we were able to connect those folks. Appreciate the reminder to engage. There's another mega study going on this time in the lower Missouri River. There was a good reminder on the last call to make sure that we link up with them, and I'm happy to report Cherie and I did meet with that study team in November, and we'll continue to engage with them since what they're implementing or proposing in the lower Missouri study could influence the Mississippi. And then this last one, the inclusion of the Atchafalaya Basin reservoirs in our study. The reservoirs do fall outside of our study area, so that is not something that we right now see within our study scope. However, there are other efforts where I think these reservoirs may fit better. So there's the Alex to the Gulf study. And Mr. Segrera, I think this comment came from you. So happy to talk more about that one in particular and kind of where that might fit. Okay, I know I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I think we're just near the end. Oops, we're just near the end. We'll get to Q&A. I'm seeing a lot of activity in the chat. So just again to recap our next steps, we're working towards our tentatively selected plan in the spring of 2026. And to get there, there's a lot. There's a lot that the team needs to do. We need to complete our review of the measures that we shared with you today. We need to continue integrating those models that Cherie described earlier. Got to get our alternatives developed and then start analyzing, evaluating, comparing those alternatives. Got to get those ecosystem models up and running. We'll continue our public engagement and do more stakeholder outreach as folks request it. We'll begin preparing our draft integrated feasibility report and environmental documentation where all of this gets captured for the public's review. And then ultimately, again, working towards selecting the tentatively selected plan and identifying recommendations for tiered studies. And so we are targeting an update in the spring. We want to make sure that we're bringing you all like a meaningful update, right? And so I can't give you a date right now. We're going to look at when the models will be done and when we'll have time to, or can kind of synthesize that information and get that available. So we're thinking maybe the May time frame, but kind of stay tuned. I think one way or another we'll push an update out so folks see where we are in the study process. I just can't commit to an exact month today, but we certainly will get the information back out to you as soon as it's available. Okay, that was a lot. I know that was a lot of slides. There's a lot of information, and I suspect a lot of questions. So we are going to go to the Q&A, and I'm going to do a plug for the feedback form. You can use your phone if you take a photo of it, right? The little link pops up. Please do fill that out. We really do appreciate the feedback on how effective these meetings are. I'm going to take like a quick minute to grab a glass of water while we start to dig through all the comments that came in. So just give us 1 minute for a break, and then we'll start the Q&A. All right, Matt Rowe, if you could help me get caught up in the chat and moderate, that would be great.
Sure. So looking back through the chat, I see our first question comment came in at 2:10. A lot of the initial ones were about how people heard about the meeting. But it's from Carrie Trapani, and I believe you covered it some, but I wanted to check and make sure there was nothing else you'd like to add about this. And it says, please mention the Mississippi Gulf Coast is affected by your study and actions.
Yeah, so the Mississippi Gulf Coast is within our study area, and as we develop those alternatives, one of our tasks as a team is to evaluate the impact. So we'll be determining kind of how best to do that in those areas. But yeah, I mean, the Mississippi Gulf Coast is a part of our study area.
And then the data that Mississippi USM and the Sound Coalition put together really does show how it literally affects and changes our world over here, which we don't want to change our world over here, with those actions. through the Bonnie Spillway nor the diversion projects. And that's my opinion. But anyway, please consider us over here, and thank you for that consideration.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I meant to mention this at the start, but going into the Q&A, I was distracted by something in here. But we'll go down the chat and read all the questions we got in the chat. Then we'll go to the phone lines, and then we'll go to everybody else who's online, just to give everybody kind of a sense of order of what we're doing. So the next comment we have is from Jim Reeder. It's a question: will you be able to use the comprehensive benefits in your calculations?
Yes, I think that's the one that Cherie answered actually at the very top of the call. So yes.
And yeah, another one from Carrie mentioning the Mississippi Sound USM study, but we just heard from him. The next is from Ivor Van Kierden. Will modeling data be made available for review?
So as we're developing the study report, so the study will include the description of the modeling efforts. Typically, like, we'll summarize those in the main report and then have the details and the appendices. And then that does go out for public review and comment period on the draft report. So that's after our tentatively selected plan milestone is when it's released to the public for review.
Okay. The next one is, do you know at this time if the 70-30 split is changed, will it require additional congressional authority, or will it be within the Corps' discretionary authority?
And I
We'll
can cover
say,
this.
oh, sure. Go ahead, Cherie.
Yep,
Welcome back.
Yep. So the current authority is to operate at a 70-30 split. So a change to that will require additional congressional authorization.
All right. Thank you, Cherie. The next question. Are you investigating the very high industrial fertilizer loads that have risen so dramatically since 1973? What about the, sorry, I'm going to butcher this, eutrophication and hypoxia these high nutrient loads are responsible for in the basin and the whole northern Gulf of Mexico?
Hey, Matt, this is
Yeah,
Sheree.
so-
I can take that one. Oh, Ann, go ahead, Ann. You want to start?
Yeah, no, I thanks. So, I think right now, many of the ecosystem restoration measures that are proposed and being analyzed, I think should help with that problem, particularly those that relate to wetland restoration. But Cherie, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to follow on Ann's point, yes, we do have like secondary or ancillary benefits related to water quality, but specifically looking at those fertilizer inputs is not within the purview of the study or typically within the mission of the Corps of Engineers. That would fall more under EPA's realm, looking at TMDLs and other agencies.
Okay, thank you. Next one, these two questions, the person seconded the original question, so I'm going to read them together. Prioritizing navigation is important with low flow in the Mississippi, but what about the saltwater wedge? And the second question is, have you addressed freshwater supply resiliency in the study?
So the first part, I could say yes, we will be evaluating both, navigation and the salt wedge is a part of that too. So yes, and that is part of that kind of conceptual hydrograph concept that we shared earlier. Can you say the second question again?
Sure.
It was something about resilience.
How have you addressed freshwater supply resilience in the study?
Yeah, we do have some measures that folks have brought to the table, right, related to water supply. And those are, there are a few. I guess I'll ask either if Cherie or someone else from the team, if anybody wants to expand more broadly, or if there's, I guess, anything in particular about freshwater resiliency that the person who asked the question wants to elaborate on. But we do, I guess the short version is like we do have some kind of water supply related measures that folks have that came up during public scoping.
Yep, that's correct. And we also are considering a potential tiered study to look at more broadly at aquifer recharge and water supply, including the Mississippi alluvial aquifer.
Okay. Um, uh, Another question about impacts the Mississippi Sound. I believe we've addressed that so far. We do have the first of several comments asking about getting copies of the PowerPoint presentation. That'll be available on our website sometime next week, along with the video from today's presentation. So just check the LMR Comp website sometime next week, and the PowerPoint and the video will both be available on there for everyone to view and review at your own leisure. The next question we have is, when you look at the 80-20 and low flow conditions for navigation on the Mississippi River, will you also look at how the lower flow by Morgan City will affect their navigability?
Yes, this is Sheree. I'll answer that. Any type of impacts in the Atchafalaya Basin that result from moving to an 80-20 flow regime would have to be evaluated. So any type of impact in that region, it could be water supply, it could be navigation, et cetera. We have to evaluate that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next comment would be, when might NEPA analysis be ready for review?
So that'll be a part of the after we select the tentatively selected plan, and the whole integrated feasibility report goes out to the public. So that includes the NEPA documentation as well. We can look up. I don't have that date in front of me. It's in 2026. Maybe before the end of the call, someone from my team can look back at our study timeline and kind of pull the date for that. But it's all part of the integrated feasibility report.
Yes, that's right, Ann. It's summer 2026. I'm not sure if that's what you said, but that's around the time frame.
Okay,
that draft report is
yeah,
expected.
no, that's great. Thanks, Sheree.
The next question we have is, how important to the study is reducing silting in the Atchafalaya Basin? Is keeping the basin working as a flood prevention area more important than landowners' claims to property?
Okay, Matt, I'll take that one. I did respond to that one in the chat that we are considering, or one of our measures is including siltation that has occurred in the Atchafalaya Basin, and how that's impacted water supply and habitats in that region. So that is part of the study currently. As far as the landowner impacts, that we would have to work with our Office of Counsel and Real Estate to get more information on that one and follow up.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, could you please share the contact information of the focal person handling sediment data for the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers?
I'm not sure I understand the contact information for the person handling the data. You mean on our study team?
Yeah, and I think we should suggest that question come through the LMR Comp email, just so that it can make it to the appropriate team member to respond.
Yeah. If there's an existing kind of data source that's publicly available, that might be something that we can share. If it's just, yeah, every kind of data request has its own kind of nuance. So agree, Sheree, if you could shoot us an email at lmrcomp@usace.army.mil, we can better answer that question or connect you with the right person.
Perfect, thank you. The next question I see as, do you have any information on how the recent federal funding freeze will impact the study timeline, et cetera?
So we've been appropriated funds through FY25, at least a portion of FY25. We are waiting for additional congressional appropriation for the remainder of the 25 million that we're authorized up to. So at this time, I can't comment on kind of the mechanisms of when Congress will appropriate those funds, but we do have funding in hand right now that was carried over from last fiscal year, and we were appropriated an additional $1 million in FY25. So the team has some money, but does require additional appropriation to continue the study.
Okay. The next question we have is, what does batcher smoothing do to wetlands along the batcher? And is that being reviewed in the context of wetlands reducing nutrients in the river?
Matt, I'm not sure. Yeah, what batcher smoothing is that something that hoping that wasn't something that was interpreted from the briefing. Is that, might need a little bit more context on that one.
Mark, would you be able to come off mute and clarify that for us, please?
Sure. Yeah, it was in your slides. You said you were smoothing the batchers as a way of reducing speeding water flow, I guess. To me, that means probably putting down mats, which may destroy wetlands. And I was just trying to figure out if that's what you were talking about.
Hey, Mark, this is Cherie. So I think what we have, we were discussing having roughness in the overbank, right? Like there's extensive underbrush and tree growth, and this is mainly between Cape Girardeau and Baton Rouge. In some areas, the overbank is as wide as 6 miles. And so in some of those regions where you do have a lot of underbrush and tree growth, it can impact water surface elevations. But there are no plans at this time to go in and smooth that out or remove any of those trees in that area. We will look at changing roughness in the overbank to see how it impacts water surface elevations, but we are not planning to smooth out the batcher in any way or remove any of that growth.
Okay, it in that specific, the way you've just described that, that's basically what I'm talking about, is the concern that might reduce the amount of area that would be used for nutrient reduction of water in the river during high
Yes.
water periods.
Right, that's correct. And we are tracking that, which is why we want to avoid reducing the ability for the vegetation to perform that function.
Yeah, thanks.
The next question we have is, where are you at with the National Environmental Policy Act documentation?
So we are, I mean, I know Mike Throne, do you want to take that question as our NEPA lead?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think we touched on it earlier. So it's going to be included with that integrated draft report. So they talked about summer 2026 when that would be available for public comment review. So this is an integrated study. So it's an integrated study that does they travel together as the presentation showed there.
Thanks, Mike.
The next question we have is regarding the 50 and 100-year planning horizons. Are you considering the age of the Old River, Bonnie Carey, and Morganza structures and the potential need to replace them?
Hey, this is Cherie, and Caitlin can chime in here as well. But no, we have under our operations and maintenance and rehabilitation a division, we regularly monitor all of our structures and the age of our structures and any kind of need for repairs or replacement. And so that happens, it's ongoing and it happens regularly within the Corps. So for the purposes of this study, it would be assumed that these structures, they're not in need of replacement. So we don't make that determination, or we don't, that it would be repaired or replaced if it needed to be. But there is one exception at the low sill structure at Old River where we recognize in order to be able to move to an 80-20 operation regime, there would need to be some changes at that structure. So yes, that particular structure in itself, we have to consider that, but the remainder of the structures are assumed to be operating and in place for the full study period. Yeah, Caitlin, did you want to add anything to that?
Sorry,
Matt.
No, I think you covered it, Cherie.
Okay.
Okay, the next question we have is, I assume you've not come up with other alternatives other than using the current flood control structures. Is that correct?
I'm assuming you mean.
Yes,
I was going to maybe ask for a clarifying question.
Okay.
So if it's about reducing flood risk, I mean, we do have other measures on the table to reduce flood risk management, or for the purposes of flood risk management. but right, there is no alternative at this point of building a new structure.
Okay, I know that
But
there
not-
were some recommendations about possibly using the Wax Lake outlet. That's why I was asking.
Oh, right, right. So I think looking for ways to move water, all those are still on the table.
Okay.
If it's about, yeah, looking at how we can move water in different ways, those are things that the team is evaluating through
Okay,
different
great.
structures, through different current structures.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is the lower Mississippi at the Madison Parish Port included in the study?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The next question we have is, how do the changes in water flow from the Yazoo Pump project and the Pearl River projects flow into your project?
Yeah, so the Yazoo pump stations are primarily to handle rainfall inputs into that region. But the Yazoo area is a backwater area as part of the MR&T project. So if we were to experience a project design flood, then that is a designated backwater area. But we can get more information related to that comment if that's not fully answering the question.
Yeah, it's from a user named Ashley. If you'd like to come off mute and clarify that, or you can email the study team for additional information on that.
Sharia, I'd like to make an addition to your observations. The
Please,
Pearl River
yes.
study won't, I'm not going to speak to Yazoo because there are details out there in the EIS, and we can go through that and give you a more comprehensive answer. But in terms of the Pearl River project in Mississippi, the Pearl River is not anticipated to impact any of the major river flows into the Mississippi because it would remain within the Pearl River basin. So any impacts associated that would be down on the coastal side. We'll be accounting for that in our modeling. Over.
Okay, thank you, Jason. We'll move on to the next question. You mentioned investigating operational changes at existing structures and explained the reevaluation of the 70-30 split at the Old River control structure. Will you also investigate operational changes at the Bonnie Carey spillway?
Yes. So yes, and I'm glad somebody asked that question if I did not say that explicitly. So that's exactly right, is looking at ways to reduce the operation of Bonnie Carey Spillway, which may mean operating Morganza more frequently, or just adjusting the triggers themselves. So that is part of this study's investigation.
Are there discussions regarding a more comprehensive approach to reservoir management among the USA districts, such as Nashville, UMR, Arkansas, Missouri, to optimize water release systems, water releases system-wide?
I may need either Cherie or Kate to help with this one. I know there's an existing mechanism or kind of process within the Corps to coordinate on amongst all of the water managers up and down the rivers, and those get together to discuss kind of reservoir management. I don't have anything new to add to that, but yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we are considering a tiered study for evaluation of those upriver reservoirs, but Caitlin could add more to that.
Yes, Sherry, that's correct. We're also looking at opportunities within current authority to manage reservoirs a little bit differently. There's no promise that anything will come out of that. We have done some evaluations of that in the past, but there is a recommendation for a tiered study to do a comprehensive greater Mississippi River Basin kind of reevaluation or systemic management to the entire system.
Thank you, Kate. The next one is a comment. I'll just read it for everybody who's dialed in. Again, thank you for mentioning your participation in the Atchafalaya Coastal Resilience Lab planning. We actually will have a workshop tomorrow in Morgan City at the port of Morgan City Since this is an important issue, the impact on the largest population in the path of either 20, 30, or possibly 40% of the flow combined of the combined Mississippi and Red Rivers, we would welcome more participation in the actual planning, which will be completed this year. The next question we have is the stability of the Old River structure a part of the study?
Matt, this is a follow-on to the first question that was related to this. Again, we would not consider stability that occurs under our operations and maintenance program, where we ensure adequate operation of all of our structures, and they are monitored regularly for that purpose. So that would happen under that effort, not under this study.
Okay. And then thank you, Sheree. There's two more questions, then I'm going to close the chat for questions there, and we can move to the phone numbers and then to the online folks. The next question is, as a follow-up on different operations at Bound and Carry, is it your belief that changing operational triggers would take additional congressional action, or is that within existing core discretion?
Yeah, I mean,
So
this is Sheree again. No, go ahead, Ann. Go ahead.
Well, I think this is actually an area where it might depend on the recommendation. I don't know. I don't think there's a belief here, right? I think this is something we can certainly speak to with our vertical team and our Office of Counsel on what additional congressional actions may be needed. I don't think we have I don't think we know for sure just yet. But Sheree, go ahead, and if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, I was going to add that the chief's report that results from this study will require congressional authorization to move to. So once we make our recommendations in our chief's report, Congress has to authorize us moving forward, unless we have authorization for something already. But I believe, like Ann said, in this case, we still would have to work this with our Office of Counsel to determine if we would need to get additional authorization. But we require authorization in order to move to our pre-engineering, construction, and design phase from Congress.
And the last question we have before continuing on to our phone-in folks is, are you considering using New Madrid floodway and possibly other floodways in the study?
I can start responding to this. I mean, the New Madrid floodway is part of the MRT system, so it is there to be activated if needed, if we were to experience project design flood or another flood event where we would require the use of that floodway to reduce risk to the public and to communities. We had some separate measures related to Birds Point, New Madrid, that were related to ecosystem restoration, and others that have been screened from the study for various reasons.
Okay, we'll move to the phone-in folks. Press *6 to unmute yourself. And when I see you come off mute, I will call on you by your phone number. Please identify yourself and then state your question. And I'll hold the line for to give everybody just a second to just hit *6 to come off mute, and then I will call on you once I see you've unmuted yourself. All right, seeing none, we can move on to people who are on and would like to ask questions in person. I know Sean Duffy, I hear you're off mute. Do you want to go ahead and ask the questions you posted in the chat as we were transitioning from the chat to the phones? Oh, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, sure. I put them in the Q&A tab instead of in the chat, but I'll start with the first one. In one of the slides, it said restrict flow downstream of East Bank crevasses to regulate flow. I'm not sure I know what that means. And it seems, because I don't know what it means, I'll hold comment.
Hey, Sean, this is Sheree. So that particular measure is referring to the number of crevasses that continue to open on the east bank of the lowermost navigation channel, creating instabilities in the river in that region. And so this would be testing a concept to place material within or near those crevasses that would be there temporarily. It would be there during low flow conditions to help with navigation and also the salt wedge. And then during a higher flow period, it's expected that that material would then move through the system, through the crevasses out into the receiving basin there on the east bank to help create land in that region. So it can benefit navigation and the salt wedge as far as drinking water and ecosystem restoration.
Okay, I mean, I understand the concept. I would say I don't see the benefits to navigation under that, but we can address that later. And on the second question, you kind of touched on the bed load and suspended sediment. I think, you know, every time I hear water and sediment budget, I think it's too simplified. The water budget here is fresh and salt water, and we have some real challenges on the lower river, and the crevasses have a role in some of the modeling. And I mean, I also like have a question related to some of the old models that are being used. Are they accurate considering some of the real changes to the river system since the 2019 flood?
Yeah, great questions. And I didn't want to apply by using existing models that they were not updated. And Caitlin can speak to this more, but the most recent survey data has been added to our models, and they have been calibrated and validated to that data. And just quickly on the water budget, you know, really the water budget is to look at the resource throughout the entire system, right? So it's a limited resource during some flow conditions. So if we experience low flow or other average flow conditions, then there's a limited resource there for use. So if you have competing uses through water supply or ecosystem restoration or diversions per se, then we need to understand what, you know, at what scenario, what flow condition would you be able to support all of those competing uses?
Okay, and low flow, of course, is when saltwater ingress happens into the river system, and you know, I know Ann did reference that calls to close off the crevasses were made, and I understand the update on the model. It just wasn't clear the first time. We'll continue to comment and follow the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And we can do maybe in a future call, and I know we have Caitlin on today, who's our engineering lead. I know some are interested in more of those really technical details, and that does get lost in the slides. So, Kate, feel free if there's anything kind of to expand on the water and sediment here that maybe Sheree and I didn't cover.
Yes, the only thing I wanted to add was that we have surveys, so updated surveys of pretty much the entire system from Cairo down to the Gulf for 2022 and 2023. So we are incorporating very recent data. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. That makes sense. It just wasn't clear in the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. The first person with their hand raised is Dean Wilson, so I ask you to come off mute and ask your question. And then if anybody else would like to come off mute and ask a question, just raise your hand in the chat. and we'll call on you next. So, Dean, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I had a couple of questions and a couple of comments. Backing up the request from Dr. Auer van Herden is, can you share the complete models from the Mississippi and Atchafalaya like now? Because we're doing parallel studies in the Atchafalaya Basin, and it will help us tremendously if we can get a copy of that without having to wait a year or 2 or 3 to get them.
Dean, I think it might depend on what you're asking. You mean like the complete model, and that's something we can talk offline about. Every kind of ask, right? We have to go through our reviews and quality control processes. There's some things that we can share, but yeah, every ask and has its own kind of nuanced response. So if you want to send us an email, Dean, and we can talk about what we can share now.
Thank you.
Or versus versus those that we may have to wait a bit.
Another thing I wanted to share with you guys. As you know, the year before last in May, we have a hard fall in the Atchafalaya Basin. It killed crawfish by the millions. Last crawfish season, it was catastrophic. For the first time ever, I've been here for almost 30 years. This is the first time that I see chicks of yellow crown heron starving in the nests. I saw them trying to catch.
Oh, Dean, I think you froze.
Okay, I thought that was me that froze.
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Hopefully, Dean can.
Okay, I think you're back. Okay. So when you're talking about changing the 7-30 split, and you talk about giving more water, less water when the water going down, and I just wanted to share with you that it's very, very important for the Atchafalaya Basin to have a slow fall, not to increase the fall. That will be catastrophic for crawfish and the core ecology of the basin. And also that the biggest expert that you have, what's best for the Atchafalaya Basin and water levels is the commercial fishermen. So I hope you work with us on the commercial fishermen to learn what's the best water conditions, water levels for crawfish production, because that's what's going to help the most the ecology of the basin. And another thing I want to share with our friends from Mississippi, then to understand, every time you use the Morganza spillway, you reduce flood capacity. And one day we're going to need everything, to save South Central Louisiana, and the basin may not have the flood capacity anymore. So I'll be very cautious about, doing that, because once you lose flood capacity, you cannot go back in time and get it again. And with sea level rise and more storms, you're gonna need the basin more and more. So loss of flood capacity is critical in the Atchafalaya Basin, and I hope you take that in consideration. And I have one more question. You talk about bed load all the time. My experience in the Atchafalaya Basin is that the sand that moves through the basin is suspended. It's very fine, go through all the columns of the water. So I can imagine what you call bed load. When you talk about bed load, what are you talking about?
Maybe Kate, can you, I guess, talk about the suspended sediment versus kind of bed load and the way those are being looked at in the models, and why we are or aren't, evaluating each? I think that might help answer a few questions related that we've gotten on sediment.
Yeah, so so as far as bed load, the models from a higher level can predict long-term trends. So that's what the intent of these models are for. It's to predict more like on decadal, so 50 years out, 100 years out, and then trends that we would see in the long-term trends that we would see occur over reaches, and not necessarily. We are looking at we are using studies to look at bed load and then suspended sediment, what's in suspension, and that is in a geomorphic assessment that we are currently doing. But as far as for the modeling, we are looking at long-term trends over that happen over decades and over larger reaches.
Yeah, that's not my question. My question is, my experience is that I don't see bed load coming from the Mississippi. What I see is sand that it is go throughout the column of the water, is dissolved with the water. So I don't understand what you call bed load. Because the sand that I see is very fine and it's not either more on the bottom of the river, it moves throughout the column of the river. So what you call bed load?
The bed load question was proposed to us by another gentleman. So that's what the answer was specific to, but bed load is just moving sediment along the bottom of the channel. So we are looking at that as far as an assessment, but it's not something currently really being factored into the modeling. We're looking more at sediment with suspended in the water column using rating curves. So using past relationships between flow and suspended sediments, that's what we're using in the model, more than bed load itself.
I'll just add one thing, Mr. Wilson. There, any river system that you encounter, whether it's the Mississippi River, Atchafalaya, or others, there's always a bed load. Like Caitlin's saying, there's always a bed load, and that is the load that moves very slowly over time. The suspended load can fall out and land there on the bed temporarily and be picked up again during high flow. But the load that is there, where you have ripples and currents, it moves very slowly. And it's there, it exists. It's just that, you don't see it as much. Like you said, you see the suspended sediment.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
Dean.
our next hand raised is Michael Brocato.
Hey, I need a clarification on one of your slides. You talked about changing the 80-20, the 70-30, 60-40, but you talked about it during a rising or falling river or basically static river. Does this mean that you guys are looking at the effects of being proactive to a rising river, or are we still looking at triggers to make those decisions on opening or closing spillways?
That's a great question, Michael. And I would say that's if I understand, the question. I would say this is looking at how we can be proactive. So as we have forecasts of the way the river hydrograph is changing, we can anticipate when we're going to be meeting those triggers ahead of time. So it's a little bit of both. It's establishing triggers, but also being proactive and knowing when we would activate those triggers. Is that correct? Is that right, Kate? Anything to add to that?
Yes, that's perfect. That's how I would have answered.
Yeah, in other words, not waiting till it's out of hand to decide to make decisions.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we'll check in with our phone-in callers. Press *6 to unmute yourself, and I'll see you've come off mute, and I will call on you by your phone number. While we're giving them a minute to make that decision, if anybody online would like to raise their hand, we'll call on you momentarily. And it does look like I missed one of the questions in the chat, so we'll go revisit that. That's a question from Marjorie Vicnair-Prey. I'm wondering what backwater area means. I believe it's in relation to the Yazoo question, and how will it work into the whole?
So we do use the term backwater in a couple different ways. That might be also what could be adding to this confusion. Sometimes we refer to like there are like the Yazoo backwater area and the Atchafalaya backwater areas. These are specific areas designed to hold water. But I don't know, Sheree or Kate, do you want to kind of expand on and help maybe differentiate the way we're looking at the backwater areas to kind of clarify that confusion.
Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Okay. The backwater areas are just basically large storage areas that are currently used within the system. They have been reserved to be activated during something for the project design, flood, or greater. So when we talk about floodways, we're talking about the New Madrid floodway. We have a couple of other floodways in the system, but our backwater areas are just really large storage areas to kind of help shave off the peaks of different floods. And they are activated in a way where timing is really a factor. So the levee heights and how they're activated and what those levee heights are set at are very strategic to take off peak flows off of a moving flood wave.
Thanks,
And
Kate.
some of those backwater areas are White, St. Francis, Red, and Yazoo. I don't know if I missed one, Caitlin.
Yeah, there's a Tensile Red backwater area as well.
Okay, I've not seen any of our phone-in callers come off mute, and there are no hands raised currently from our online users. So I'll take this opportunity to plug the website. Please visit it. We'll have the recording from this meeting with the slide deck available sometime next week. And if you have any further questions, comments, anything more detailed analysis, as we've said, please contact the team via the email, and they will get back to you. Anne.
Was that Anne or and?
Oh, Anne. Sorry.
And okay, that's what I thought.
Is there anything else to add?
No, that's great, Matt, and appreciate James Howard in the chat. You know, even asked, hey, how can I submit suggestions like was done in public scoping? And so I think that's a great way to conclude this meeting, right? So if you'd like to share and you didn't get an opportunity, or you think of something after the call today, go ahead and send us an email. That really is the best way to submit your comments to us. You can reach us at lmrcomp@usace.army.mil. We also accept mail, snail mail. You're also, you're welcome to write us a letter. I have the address here up on the PowerPoint at the New Orleans District Office on Leak Avenue. So again, thank you all for joining today. This was great discussion, a lot of material, a lot of really good questions. So I appreciate the time and all of your participation. And one last final plug too, please do fill out that survey if you haven't already. All right, thanks everybody.